All right, let's dive deep into how money, time, and labor all kind of intertwine in the modern economy. We're taking excerpts from Lisa Adkins' book, The Time of Money.
Sounds fascinating.
It really is.
Yeah.
Be prepared for some real mind benders here. We're going to be talking about money becoming more than just a tool, securitized debt, and how unemployment has a whole new look these days.
A lot of people think about money and time as, well, separate things, but like we're going to see, they're actually getting pretty closely linked within our economic systems.
Okay, so Adkins points to this major shift, like back in the 1970s, like the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement. Can you kind of break that down for our listener?
Sure. So before that, global currencies were all pegged to the US dollar, which itself was backed by gold.
Right.
It was stable, but it also meant that money couldn't really generate as much profit, I guess.
Yeah.
And so when that system kind of went away, things got a lot more dynamic,
Oh, okay.
which led to what Adkins calls financial expansion.
Financial expansion. So how did that change what money even is?
It's not just about, trading it for goods and services anymore. You had this huge growth in financial markets, and money became super productive, but not in the traditional sense of making stuff, more like in its ability to basically make more money.
Okay.
Right.
And so this is where we get to securitization.
hmm
Adkins really emphasizes this as a driver of this new financial world.
Hmm. It's kind of like think about taking things like mortgages, different types of debt, and bundling them up, turning them into assets that you can actually trade.
Wow.
So instead of a bank, holding on to your mortgage till it's paid off, they package it with a bunch of other mortgages, chop it up into pieces, and then boom, sell those pieces to investors. It's about creating ways to profit from just the movement of money itself.
So how does this world of high finance, Wall Street, all that, how does it affect like our listener, just in their everyday life?
Well, it means even simple stuff like getting a mortgage is now tied to these, complex global financial networks. Adkins gives this really interesting example, the U.S. Treasury yield curve.
Oh, right.
It basically shows interest rates on government bonds over different lengths of time. But the wild part is how it became this way to profit from what she calls temporal relationships, where time literally becomes something you can trade.
Time as a commodity. Whoa. Okay. How does that even work?
So picture this, you're betting on how interest rates are going to change in the future. You're making money off of like the ups and downs of those rates as time goes by.
Yeah.
You're literally turning time into profit.
That is wild. All right, let's shift gears a bit to another big idea Adkins talks about, austerity. We hear this word a lot, especially when governments are dealing with, debt after financial crises. It's basically about cutting spending, right?
Exactly. And Atkins asked this really provocative question: can just redistributing wealth actually lead to social justice in this new economic system we're talking about? She used the example of the women's liberation movement back in the 1970s.
Right. Fighting for equal pay, financial independence, hugely important stuff.
Yeah.
But Adkins argues that money's power to actually measure and deliver justice has uh, changed with all this financial expansion.
Things aren't as straightforward anymore. Households, through mortgages and all kinds of consumer debt, they're now key players in this whole finance-led growth thing. They're both benefiting from it and feeling the burden of it in ways that we just didn't see a few decades ago.
And that leads us to one of Adkins' most intriguing concepts, the speculative time of debt. It's about how all this securitized debt changes our whole perception of time.
Yeah, we've gone from this idea of like definitely paying back debt to just being able to keep up with the payments, what's called servicing the debt. Think about your own experience with like a mortgage or something.
It's not really about reaching a point where you're totally debt-free anymore, right? It's more about managing this constant flow of payments, often for like decades.
Exactly. And the way they calculate how much debt you can handle, it's not based on, what you'll probably earn in your lifetime anymore. It's based on what you might potentially earn, leading to what Adkins calls a politics of possibility. Your financial future becomes about what's possible, not what's certain. And this has huge implications for how we view work and wages, too.
Like work becomes a gamble in this system. Adkins really gets into the problems with wages in this age of, financial expansion. She points out this gap that's growing wider and wider between what people earn and the actual value of the work they're doing.
Right. We see wage stagnation, wage suppression across so many fields, and more folks are relying on debt just to cover basic living expenses, even when they're working full-time jobs.
So Adkins uses this term indebted laboring. Can you unpack that a little for our listener?
Basically, it means that workers are forced to go into debt just to make up for the fact that their wages aren't enough. It's this cycle where debt becomes like a requirement for, just surviving economically.
So then what does value even mean in this context? If our wages don't reflect the real worth of our work and we have to go into debt just to get by, it really challenges that whole idea that hard work equals a stable, good life.
Totally. It forces us to look at this kind of uncomfortable truth that the link between our effort and what we get back for it has been fundamentally reshaped. The old assumptions don't really hold up anymore.
And this takes us to how Adkins looks at the changing nature of unemployment. There's this common idea that when we have financial crises, it automatically means we go back to traditional unemployment.
Yeah.
People out of work, looking for jobs, waiting for the economy to get better.
Right, right. But as Adkins points out, unemployment itself has transformed. It's not that passive waiting game anymore. It's become more dynamic. It requires you to constantly be doing something, building skills, even if you don't have a paying job.
She talks about these activation regimes, sometimes called workfare, which are now pretty standard in many countries. These systems basically require people to constantly show that they're willing to work, to improve their skills, to participate in all these programs, even when there aren't enough jobs to go around.
So unemployment is now all about, always being ready, always adapting. It's a far cry from those classic studies of unemployment like Marienthal, where it was portrayed as this period of empty time and lost futures.
Mm.
Maybe we should dig into that a little more in the next part of our deep dive.
So Atkins is basically asking us to think about what all this means for, our sense of self-worth, our ambitions, what it even means to be a part of society when the lines between work and non-work are getting so blurry.
Yeah, it's a big question. And it really gets at the heart of what Atkins is trying to do. She's not just like analyzing economic structures. She's looking at how those structures shape our lives, our hopes and fears, even how we understand time itself.
It's like she's giving us this new language to understand the world around us, a world where the old rules just don't apply anymore. So how do we navigate this new terrain? What does Adkins suggest?
Well, one thing that's so valuable about her work is that it's not just a critique, it's also about imagining new possibilities for the future.
Okay, so let's recap some key takeaways here from the time of money.
All right. We started by looking at how money's gone beyond just being a way to pay for stuff. It's become a commodity in itself, especially in the world of modern finance.
Right. And then we talked about how securitized debt has changed our whole relationship with time. It's not about becoming debt-free anymore. It's about managing this constant stream of payments. And our financial futures depend more on what we might earn, not what we're guaranteed to earn.
And we also dug into that gap between wages and the real worth of labor with this idea of indebted laboring, where even working becomes a gamble.
And then finally, we explored how unemployment itself has changed. It's not a passive state anymore. It's about being constantly ready and adaptable, driven by these activation regimes and this pressure to always be upskilling.
Hmm. Adkins leaves us with a really powerful question. As that line between work and non-work disappears, and money itself becomes this thing to speculate on, what happens to the future of work? What happens to our individual freedom? What happens to our ability to shape our own lives?
Yeah, it's a question we all have to wrestle with. This time of money is here, and it's up to us to figure out how we're going to live in it.
Adkins' book gives us the tools to start doing that. I definitely recommend reading the whole thing to get a more complete understanding of all this.
Before we wrap up, I was thinking it might be helpful to kind of boil down everything we've talked about into like 10 key points for our listeners to think about. What do you think?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, so number one, the rise of financial expansion after the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement changed what money is at its core. Number two, money became a commodity itself, able to make more money within the complex world of modern finance. Number three, securitization, where debt gets bundled up and traded, became a major force in this new financial landscape. Number four, even though it seems far away, this whole system actually affects our everyday lives, connecting things like getting a mortgage to global networks. Number five, the U.S. Treasury yield curve shows how even time can become something to be traded, with people profiting from changes in interest rates as time passes. Number six, austerity measures, which often come after financial crises, make us wonder if just redistributing wealth is enough for social justice in this new economic reality. Number 7, with the idea of speculative time of debt, the goal shifts from paying off debt to just keeping up with the payments. Number 8, this has created what's called a politics of possibility, where our financial futures depend on potential earnings, not guaranteed income. Number 9, we see the rise of indebted laboring, where more and more workers have to go into debt just to survive because their wages aren't enough. And finally, number 10, unemployment isn't about being passive anymore. It's about constantly being ready and adaptable, pushed by activation regimes and this need to always be learning new skills.
Wow, that's a great summary of the key insights from the time of money. Well done.
Thanks. It's been another fascinating journey into the world of ideas. Keep those brains working, folks, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.
It's been really interesting digging into Adkins' work like this. She paints this picture of how these economic forces are messing with our relationship to time, to money, to work itself. It's pretty compelling, sometimes kind of unsettling too.
I think what struck me the most is we're playing by a whole new set of rules now.
Yeah.
And those rules, they're kind of hidden, hard to make sense of.
It's like we're in this game where, they keep moving the goalposts and the scoreboards in some language we barely understand.
And that feeling, that sense of not knowing, of being swept along by something we can't control, that's what makes Adkins' work so important, right?
Yeah.
It's not just some theoretical thing. It's like a wake-up call, a push to look closely at the forces that are shaping how we live.
Right. It's making us ask these hard questions about what work is even worth, about how we see time, about what economic justice even means in this new era, I guess.
Exactly. And Atkins doesn't hand us easy answers, but she gives us the tools to start thinking about all this stuff, to start asking those questions.
I really like how she ties all these, big economic ideas to our everyday lives, whether it's dealing with a mortgage, trying to get by on a wage that's barely budging, feeling like you have to constantly learn new skills just to keep up. Her work connects to what so many people are going through.
That's what makes the time of money so powerful. It's not just about understanding the system. It's about seeing how that system affects us personally.
And it's about giving us the power to question those systems, to demand they be more transparent, to maybe even imagine totally different ways of organizing our economic lives.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a really thought-provoking deep dive. I would definitely encourage our listeners to check out the whole book to dig even deeper into these ideas.
I agree. Atkins' work is essential reading for anyone who wants to understand what's shaping our world and how we fit into it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time as we continue exploring the world of ideas.